Welcome, everybody. I'm going to talk about this stuff. So, real quick, I am Ben. I am the field CTO of ThoughtSpot. I was one of the co-founders of Mode. So, as a little bit of background, I submitted this talk to Coalesce like 18 months ago for the New Orleans version. You can tell because I forgot and left this like New Orleans joke in there. So it's kind of dated. But anyway, so this talk was submitted like 18 months ago, and then in August, the folks at DBT published this blog post promising what you would get at Coalesce, saying things like it was going to deliver a lot of value, and it was for data practitioners by data practitioners, and there would be topics that matter, and it would increase the value and generate stellar ROI. If you were looking for any of these things, there are lots of other talks right now that you should probably be attending. I would recommend like not being here for this. If you're looking for value, not the place for you. If you're looking for ROI, not the place for you. Also, if you're looking for practitioners, I'm not really one of those anymore either. So I used to be. These are the number of queries that I've written in Mode over time. I started good, didn't so much finish well. So these are also queries written in Mode, a ThoughtSpot company. That is not the official marketing way to phrase this, but whatever. Anyway, so like what has happened in between, well, I guess this was my like analyst phase as represented by Jonah Hill. What happened in between here is this. Shout out to some random thing I found on the internet to scrape your Google Calendar and DuckDB. So I was in a bunch of meetings. This was my like pointy-haired boss phase. And then, you know, I stopped going to a bunch of meetings, and this was like words written on the internet. So this was my like kind of heckle at people phase. The good news, though, is this is not what it looks like at Mode. If you look at the total queries written in Mode, it's a chart that's mostly up and to the right. And so if you count the total number of queries in Mode, it's something like 2 billion plus whatever is the number that we're allowed to say publicly. So in theory, there are lots of useful insights in these billions of queries. Unfortunately, I don't know how to find them. And so there will not be useful insights in this. However, if you're looking for things like this, about petty fights, about things like these commas, and billions of queries, that is something I am interested in. So that is what we're going to talk about today. So it'll be things like, should we write 2 billion like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, which if you're Indian, this is actually how you would write it, which I recently learned. This is how folks in India write numbers. So anyway, as I said, count from takeaways, there will be none. Now, this is where we will start. So we have count star from takeaways. Do we have count star, or do we write count one? So if you ask the internet this, say like Stack Overflow, say do you write count one or count star, it tells you there is no difference. They are, as this says, like trivial. It's all the same thing. Great. If you ask Tom, I don't know what this is. I guess it's like an Oracle help site. Tom says they are the same. There's nothing different between count star and count one. If you ask Tech Target, I don't know what it says because it's got a paywall and I didn't pay for it. If you ask this website, Java, SQL, and Juke, I don't know what that is. This person, Luca, says MySQL doesn't matter. Oracle doesn't matter. Postgres maybe matters. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. SQL Server doesn't matter. Okay, so I don't know if it matters or not. That's what we want to figure out. So fortunately, if you do the number of count star or count queries in Mode, there's like 20 million distinct queries. So we can try to figure out which ones are faster. Before getting into this, I do want to make two caveats generally. One is that the first thing is that all of this is based on like metadata. Customer data is very much like encrypted, and I can't see any of it, and it's all like there's no physical access to it. So I'm all kind of making some guesses here about the things that people are trying to do. I have no idea what the intent behind any of these queries are or anything like that. We cannot see any of the customer data. So really a lot of this is like guessing with style. The second thing is, one of those pieces of metadata that we can see is the error rates for queries. This is the error rate for queries within Mode, like across all of the customers and everything like that. It's about 8%. 8% of the queries that people write end up in errors. My error rate is 24%. So trust all of that as much as you want. 75% of this is right, 25% is wrong. So it's not really guessing with style. It's more just like straight up guessing. So we'll do our best. Anyway, count star versus count one. So one of the things we can look at is like run times. That's what those things were about in the various forums on the internet. So which one is faster? if you look at the queries that use count star versus count one, count star is slightly faster for like the median run times, like 6 seconds versus 7. If you look at 75th percentile, same thing, 90th percentile, 95th percentile, 99th percentile. Cool. So like, all right, count star, slightly better. If you look at it by database, since that one post said, hey, it makes a difference by database, this is actually what you see. This is how much faster count star is by database, so it does seem to make a little bit of a difference. Like, shout out Snowflake here for being consistent. It's the only one that actually is consistent. I don't know what's going on with Oracle. Tom seems like he was wrong here. Like, Oracle is way slower for count star, but whatever. Okay, so this is what we get. But this is like how fast things are. Another question is, what do we actually use? Like, which ones are popular? Do we use count star or count one? So for queries that have these things, count star is for in 80% of them. Count one is in 16.9% of them, which makes kind of the obvious question of like, what's going on here? Like, there are some queries for which people are using both. I do not know why. Part of this could be like, okay, this is some sort of experience thing. People early in their careers are trying to figure out what to do. They sometimes use one, sometimes use the other. Maybe they evolve over time and choose one that is better. Maybe they choose count star because it seems like it's faster. So we could look at this by like the number of queries that people have written. This is like the decile of the total number of queries they've written in mode. Effectively, it's just the amount of experience they have. So the far left here is like the least experienced folks. The far right is the most experienced. This is what we see. So actually, the more experience you get, the more you use the slower one, and the more you're doing this crazy thing. So like, I don't know what's going on. I cannot explain this. The only explanation I have for this is like some people, men, people, whatever, just want to watch the world burn. I guess these are the people who are using all of these things in different ways. Some people want to watch the world burn, like this guy. You may also be looking at this and be wondering, hey, like, why'd you use that pie chart? What's up with pie charts? We all hate pie charts. So that's kind of the second thing is pie charts versus everything else. Should we be using pie charts? There are pie charts in mode. Let's figure that out. The number of charts in mode is like this. So 96% of the charts are not pie charts. 4% are pie charts. You could look at it like this. You also, if you prefer, could look at it like this. This is the frequency of pie charts in mode. But 4%, like, is that a lot of pie charts? I don't know, like, is that high, is that low? If you ask people like Edward Tufte, he'll mostly try to sell you a webinar, but then he'll tell you that pie charts should never be used, so 4% is probably too high. But there's like more interesting ways to look at this. So mode has this kind of like draft and publish version. You can create charts in an editor. It looks like this. You can choose then to add it to your report or your dashboard. So it's kind of a drafted version of charts and then like a presented version of charts. And so the question is like, are pie charts more likely to be presented? Maybe they're more valuable because we present them more often or not, like do we just draft with them? 56.8% of the non-pie charts are published in mode. So when we create charts in mode, we're mostly likely to publish them at a rate of 56.8%. Pie charts, actually a little bit higher. So we actually present pie charts more than other types of charts. No, that doesn't answer if it's a good thing. Like maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe we should be listening to Edward Tufte. But we can also measure that to see like how engaging are the various reports that have pie charts versus not. This is like an engagement score. It's basically the number of views standardized to 100. It's not quite exactly the number of views because you have to make a variety of adjustments about like how many people are in the organizations and how long the report has been around and stuff like that. But if you do that, reports with no charts at all have an engagement score of 100. If you have charts that aren't pie charts, you get this engagement score of like 750 or something. So that's a little bit better. If you add pie charts 1 to 2, it's even higher. And if you add more than pie charts than that, it's even higher. So turns out that actually pie charts are a pretty good thing. Or if you prefer to look at this, you can look at this like a pie chart, which this is a pretty terrible chart. Anyway, so pie charts not so bad. And obviously, now some of you may look at this and say like pie charts not so bad or pie charts not so bad. So that goes to the third thing, which is locations of commas. Where do we put them? There's like, this is a debate lots of people have all the time. The argument for commas tends to be, or for like leading commas before the lines, as opposed to the end of commas, into lines, tends to be this, that leading commas make it easier to comment things out. Like the errors will be lower. It's better to write that way. Basically, you can write queries like this. If you comment this out, this will have an error. If you write a query with leading commas and you comment this out, maybe. If you comment that out, then it'll work. And so that's like the debate. Which one should we use? So, leading commas versus trailing commas. So it turns out actually the New Yorker is like very into punctuation, like famously so. There is someone there who does this, and like she is the punctuation person at the New Yorker. Her name is Mary Norris. She is a query proofreader. I don't know what that is, but it seems relevant here. She has also written a bunch of books called like The Comma Queen. So she should be the person who can answer this question, not us. I actually asked her on Twitter once, and she said she knows nothing about SQL. She also knows nothing about where to put periods, apparently, so I don't know about this whole pronunciation thing. But, so we're left to do this one on our own. We'll have to do it ourselves. Okay, so query error rates, leading commas, trailing commas, what do we got? Trailing commas, it's like 12.4%. You're going to see some other error rates in the rest of this presentation. They're going to look different than this. This is one of the places where we have to make adjustments for, like, was it edited by one person or multiple people, or was it the new queries versus existing queries? So there's a bunch of stuff here that'll look inconsistent. That's why there's, I think I'm doing this right, but 25% of the time I'm not. So trailing commas have an error rate of 12.4%. Leading commas, slightly lower. So the argument for leading commas seems to be better. Now, if you just look at this, as people like Nate Silver say, you have to look at the crosstabs. Fine, we'll look at the crosstabs. So this is the error rate you just saw. Again, what if you want to look at things by experience? Like maybe part of this is explained by less experienced people are using trailing commas because it seems more natural. Maybe more experienced people, it's like a difference in sort of that kind of split. So we can look at the error rate by, again, the author experience of people writing queries. So if we look at kind of bottom decile, top decile, and everything in between, we start to see stuff like this. So it actually turns out that trailing commas are worse across the board in terms of error rates, so can't explain it that way. Could explain it by databases. Maybe some databases have errors more often. So again, if we look at the error rates by databases, leading commas are also better across the board, except for MySQL. I don't know what that's about. Now, some things, so it sounds like leading commas, better for us, great. Some things that are good for us, we don't always do. So do we actually use trailing commas versus leading commas? And all of the queries in mode, 16.3% use leading commas, 82% use trailing commas. So we're not really paying attention to like what I guess the doctors tell us to. Again, that leaves like, what the hell is his? It's like, okay, not into that. But, like we all make mistakes. There are all times we do dumb things. Maybe they're just queries where we mess something up. Sometimes you do something silly. What do you do? So maybe people like learn over time again. Maybe the more experience you get, you behave differently. And how people actually write queries versus like the individuals writing queries versus the queries themselves. So in this case, we want to look at like the behavior of a person across a lot of queries and how do they behave. Turns out that 5.4% mostly use leading commas. They're like biased towards that. 80% mostly use trailing commas. They're biased towards that. And again, we've got all these people in the middle that cannot make up their minds. So if we also break this apart by experience of like the more experienced you are, which ones do you choose? In this case, we all kind of shift towards leading or trailing commas. So the more experience you get, the more we actually start to do the crazy thing of using both. We can't make up our minds. So like, okay, that's kind of annoying, but I guess that's what we do. So I guess it is like, do not use trailing commas is the lesson here. However, there's one more way to look at this. All of this is done in kind of a like demographic analysis of people who are old versus people who are young. People who are young use trailing commas. People who are old use leading commas. There's a different way to look at it, which is more of a longitudinal study of let's look at the same people as they age. Shout out Face App or whatever this was that now Russia has all my information. So what happens to people over time? Like when they choose one thing, do they evolve into the other? So if you start out as a leading comma advocate, 64% of the time you stay as a leading comma advocate. 23% of the time you like kind of half make up your mind and can't choose. And 13% of the time you actually turn into a trailing comma advocate. Okay, so you kind of stay where you are, but you start to shift a little bit towards trailing commas. If you start trailing, you overwhelmingly stay there. But the real question is what happens when you start in the middle? Which side do you choose? You actually choose the trailing commas. So seems to be that people prefer the trailing commas. The leading commas may be better, but they prefer the trailing. And so this is kind of the place that we're in. My like general belief on this is it's basically because trailing commas look better. That it's a nicer thing to read, the thing on the left here, than the thing on the right. And sometimes the good-looking but useless thing is actually what we want. And so that's the case with commas. Now, you may say like, okay, sometimes we want a good-looking and now thing that is good. We want something that is enough. Where are there places where maybe the good-looking thing is actually also the better thing? So I guess the fourth thing we're going to talk about, which is CTEs. CTEs seem like a thing that looks nice and might be a better way to write queries compared to something like this, which is a bunch of subqueries and this kind of nested hell. So let's talk about CTEs versus subqueries. So usage rate of these things in Mode, what do they look like? So we've got CTEs for long queries. We don't talk about long queries because you're probably not writing CTEs on short queries. So queries for more than about 50 lines. In Postgres, about half those queries use CTEs. In Redshift, about 2/3. In Snowflake, about 3/4. So we tend to use CTEs when we write long queries. I looked at this by database because some databases don't support it, and it's all like a mess and things like that. So we kind of prefer CTEs. That's cool, great, makes sense. But there's another question here, which is like, how do we actually write them? What's the process going from a new query to a finished query? Really, the argument behind CTEs is it make this process easier. They're easier to write, they're easier to read. It's not just whether or not we use them, but it's whether or not it makes things like more effective. And so how long does it take to do this? How hard is it to get there? This is kind of the point of writing CTEs. And so we can answer these questions. So to write a working Snowflake query of more than 50 lines, focus just on Snowflake to kind of control for what you might be doing with the query, again, since we have no idea. If you're using CTEs versus not, it actually takes a median of about 30 minutes to write a working 50-line query if you're using CTEs, but less time if you're not using CTEs. So apparently this makes things a little easier. Also, it takes a median of about 7 drafts of queries to do this in both cases, but the drafts actually fail at a higher rate using CTEs. So it turns out CTEs are actually like a little bit worse for writing queries. I don't know why, it doesn't make sense, but again, we find ourselves here. I guess we just like the thing that was good looking and stupid as opposed to the thing that's actually useful. So the last thing I'll talk about here, this was all just looking at queries in Snowflake. We'll talk about Snowflake and the obvious debate of Databricks at the risk of getting a horse head put in my bed. Snowflake and Databricks, what do we got? Okay, so when everybody talks about this, they talk about speed. They talk about things like this, where Databricks says they set some world record. Snowflake says, no, they didn't. Databricks says, yes, we did. And so you end up in this kind of situation. It's like, these are good colors for this. This worked out well. The problem with this is, it's like, okay, great, which one's faster? I don't know. Like, this is a very fast car, but I don't know how to drive it. If you put me in this, it's not going to work out. I need something simpler. And so rather than looking at just the speed of these databases, what we typically talk about, we can talk about like the ease of use and which one's actually nicer to use versus how fast they are. So one way to look at that is error rates for queries. If we look at the error rates for Databricks, we're at 29%. These are new queries, so they're sort of fresh drafts. Snowflake, it's actually a good bit lower. So Snowflake, slightly easier to use. Again, we can kind of control for this for the number of queries that you're editing. And so there's like a draft process when you write queries. You start with one, you edit it, you draft it again, you write it again. Maybe something like that makes a difference. Maybe it's easier to write queries initially in one, but over time it gets harder to write it in the other. That doesn't actually work. Databricks actually continues to be an easier thing or a harder thing to write queries in than Snowflake, the more you actually evolve a query. So in this case, Snowflake seems like it's a little bit easier. However, the output of this is not exactly the only thing to measure. There's also a measure of effort, like how hard is it to do this? Great, so Snowflake has fewer errors, but how much work are we having to put in to actually do that? One way you can do that is how much like SQL you actually have to write. And so in that case, the median query length and the amount of lines of queries as you write, as you evolve a query over time, and Snowflake looks like this. So the first query people write starts out as like 15 lines, and as they get to edit 50, it turns into something that's 60 or 70. In Databricks, it's actually a little bit lower. And so Databricks may be harder to write, but more efficient in some ways. And so, okay, in the Snowflake ease of use edition, or the sort of battle between these two in the ease of use edition, for the sake of the ThoughtSpot and Mode's marketing team, I love all of my children equally. I will not choose favorites here. Obviously, there may be one, but, you know, I'm not going to share. So anyway, I have no idea what time it is. We may be out of time. As I said, there are no key takeaways in this thing. We have probably reached the time limit, and so I'm going to stop here. So thank you, everybody, for joining. I have no idea what this was. Are there questions? I don't. Is this a thing for questions? Yes. Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to do was capitalization, but Mode will autocomplete in you have a choice of whether or not to autocomplete in capital letters or lowercase letters. There is a default setting, which makes it really hard to figure out like what people are actually doing. And so I did not do that. So yeah, so these were things that were ideally things that would not be auto-completed by mode in some way. Leading and trailing commas, for instance, we don't tell you what to do. You have to actually type it yourself. Yeah. So there was a slide that was that. Turns out it's very hard to figure out which ones people are using. I am a spaces person because I obnoxiously format queries in, oh, how do I do this? Oh boy. There's a way to obnoxiously format queries where you have to actually space everything because tabs won't line up. So yeah, so I'm very pro spaces, but I'm sure there are some tab folks, and if I figure out how to write queries better, maybe I can answer that later. Anything else? Cool, thanks y'all.